Hi, and welcome to the Deer IQ podcast where smart hunting begins. I'm Adam Lewis, and we're in our series on land and food strategies, how to best set up your land for success. In this episode, I'm back with Michael Veine. We did a previous episode on public land, and we're discussing how he hunts and finds success on a very challenging hunting property and a challenging area. When things are stacked against you, what can you do to still get it done? And because of where Michael is at, the video and audio was challenging to edit, so sorry about some of this, but it's a really good episode, and I appreciate you staying and listening in. Okay, so here are the top things to look for during this episode. What is Michael's extensive hunting background, and what makes his area so challenging to hunt? What does he say about how to determine whether a buck is a shooter in these type of really challenging areas? What is Michael's food plot strategy, and why does he refuse to hunt certain plots? What is his strategic approach to hunt his property so he always has fresh spots to hunt? How much of his property is sanctuary, and how does he accomplish this? And how is bird hunting a vital part of his deer hunting strategy? And remember, if you like this podcast, share it with a buddy who may benefit. That really helps the podcast grow and is greatly appreciated. And also, if you listen to this on your podcast channel, if you give a rate and review and DM me a screenshot of that, I'll send you a free decal as a thank you. So thanks for listening to the podcast, and let's get to it and up your deer IQ. Okay, I'm here with Mike Veine. Mike, welcome to the Deer IQ podcast.
Hello, Adam.
Yeah, good to have you on. I know Mike. I've known Mike for several years here, and it's kind of interesting how we met. Just like another guy we had on the podcast a while back, Manny, we actually met arm wrestling. And Mike, we got talking and stuff and realized he's actually a writer, just like me. He's been writing a long time. He's done chartering as well on the Great Lakes. And also arm wrestling, you have quite a few accomplishments there too. So welcome to the podcast, and let's start by just take a minute or two, and I didn't really introduce you very good. Tell us a little bit about you and your background, Mike.
Well, I've been deer hunting for 50 years, and most of it in Michigan, but also in many other states. And as you alluded to, we met in arm wrestling circles at arm wrestling practice, I believe, years ago,
Yep.
maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I've been active in arm wrestling and outdoor riding, and as you mentioned, charter fishing. But I'm retired now. I retired 3 years ago, and so right now I just basically live a life of leisure. So I get to hunt and fish a lot more than I used to for fun. Where I used to fish for a living. I also was a full-time taxidermist. And, my writing career spanned back to the early 90s, and I probably had over 2,000 articles published by 50-some different magazines over that time span. And especially the first 20 years, I was very active, doing many, many articles per year, hundreds even sometimes. That was back in the days when they had a lot more print publications, and the writing industry was a lot different and a lot more lucrative for freelance writers. And I jumped into that for quite a while. And for the last 10 years, I slowed up on my writing, and in the last 3 years, I retired and got out of it completely. So
That is a ton of articles.
Yeah.
That's a ton there. And so you bring a lot of wealth of information here, so we're going to try to pull some of that out here. But the topic today for this episode is looking at land and food strategies. And I know that you hunt primarily now in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right?
Yeah, over recent years, especially the last 7 or 8 years, I've been hunting 100% in the UP.
Gotcha. So that, for listeners out there in a wide variety of states, everybody's situation's a little different. And I would call this a very challenging situation that we're going to talk about is if you hunt in a tough to hunt area for a lot of reasons, Mike does that, right? And he's very successful. So let's jump right in here. So tell us what is unique about where you hunt in the UP that makes that challenging, and what are some challenges that you face up there?
Well, my deer camp is in the middle of the UP, and it's big woods country. We don't have any agriculture near us whatsoever, and it's just woods. And so in a situation like that, my property is, medium size, I would call it. I've got 200 acres of private property that I hunt. And I also hunt a lot on public land as well, too. 50% of my time, I would say approximately, is on public land. And I've developed this property. We bought it back in 1995, started hunting it in 96, and it was just raw woods. We had it logged, and I had roads put in. There wasn't even a two-track on the property to penetrate into the part of it. And it's composed of probably about a 50-50 mix of swamp and high ground. So that presents some challenges. There's a stream that runs through it, a swampy stream, lots of beavers and things like that we have to contend with. Um, Very heavy predator load in our area. We have, very high numbers of wolves and bears and coyote. Well, coyote numbers have gone down since the wolf numbers have gone up, but we also have bobcats, and I'm even run across a cougar track, last year. So we have, all the predators accounted for. So it's very challenging in that regard that our deer numbers have been knocked down. Not so much by hunting pressure in the area, although that's probably just low to moderate in my area that I'm in. I wouldn't call it real light unless you go into the public land areas that I hunt. But on my property, there's a lot of private property around me that gets pressured, and everybody hunts it. But deer numbers are probably about 1/3 of what they used to be back in the 90s currently. So it's a challenging environment in that we have a more limited resource to go after, and you really have to hunt smart in a situation like that to be consistently successful.
Yeah, it's there's a huge challenges up in the UP. We could probably talk, for hours on those, but a lot of challenges there. And so, what would you define as your, I guess, a good buck in your area? Because that varies wildly from area to area and state to state. So, like, what do you define as, having success up there where you hunt in this challenging environment?
We see 2 to 3 year old deer, and them are the ones that are getting shot mostly in our area. Most of the people in our area practice QDM, and they're passing up at least the yearling deer. But once they hit 2 years old and they get a rack and they become legal targets, under the hunter's choice antler restrictions that we have up there, which most people buy combo licenses and you have to abide by antler restrictions on those two tags then. So that means that yearlings are basically off limits for most of the hunters up there, and most of the people pass them up anyways. Once they get to 2 years old, they're shot, and 3-year-olds are definitely targeted. And back in days past, before we had the heavy wolf numbers in the area, we used to get more deer that made it to 4 and 5 years old, especially if you hunted in more of the remote areas. But we're just not seeing that anymore. The predation is knocking off those bigger bucks. It seems like the bucks will make it to 2 and 3 years old, but then after that, they're getting shot or eaten, and they just don't make it. So our deer that we're shooting nowadays are 2 to 3 year old deer.
Gotcha.
And that's one thing
And
you have
that,
to be is you have to be realistic as far as what you have in your area, and then you have to target the top deer you have. And if you try to target 4 and 5 year old deer where you don't even have any that live that old, or very rarely do, then you're not going to have much fun hunting. You won't have success, and you'll be
right.
struggling.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people get hung up on inches or age classes, and you do really have to make it specific to your area and have realistic goals. Like, okay, focus on the top 10% or 15% of the deer you actually have in your area with your pressure around you. Because up there, what's a good buck up there might not be somewhere else, and vice versa. It just really is dependent. So, a 3-year-old buck's really good up there type thing. So what do you do as far as, so you went in, you did some logging to your land initially. Tell us a little more about, your setups that you've put in place to just take advantage of that. Because it seems like every year you're tagged out real early. You seem to have really good success.
It doesn't always happen that way.
Right. So what have you put in place to help you do that?
Well, we bought the property and had it logged. The loggers put some logging roads in, and from those logging roads, we had them improved. We hired excavators to come in and bulldozers, and they carved out some food plots for us. Right off the bat, this would have been probably in '96, '97. That was when we had our first food plots put in there, and We started out with some fairly small food plots at first, and we had very good success with them as far as drawing deer in. Just having like a half-acre food plot, or the one was maybe an acre, and the one was about a half an acre. That was our first plots that we put in. Because there wasn't any food plots in the area, and I mean, none of the landowners had food plots in those areas, and so the deer just devastated whatever you planted. You could never hardly even get it to last through halfway through October before it just be eaten right down to the dirt. So over the years, I expanded those food plots greatly. I had one food plot that was put into the center of my property that was 5 acres, and had that bulldozed right out of the forest. Had a guy come in with a great big bulldozer and work for a whole day, and back in like 1999 or whatever it was, I had that put in. It was pretty cheap. If you had to have that done now, it'd be very expensive. So once I had all I had another food plot about 2 acres put in, and then I have about, I think, 12 food plots total. The other ones I had put in, I did a lot with a mini excavator by just renting it and coming in there and pulling out stumps in areas where there was kind of crummy regrowth, and where it made strategic sense to put those plots in, and just clearing out little areas. And I'm talking like stuff like a quarter acre or so, maybe even half acre at the most, but usually less than that even. And so I had these small plots, and those are the ones I hunt. The 5 acre food plot that I haven't hunted that thing in over 10 years. I'm not saying I would never hunt it. If I had a reason to go in there and there was a possibility of killing a deer that I wanted in that spot, I might do it. And probably only during gun season, though, because it's so big. And it's hard to anticipate where they're going to come out at, where they're going to move through it. So the bigger food plots, that 2 acre food plot's the same way. We don't hunt on that one at all either. However, there is one gun blind that can sort of see half of it quite a ways away. We're just not hunting those larger plots. We're hunting the smaller ones. And those seem to be the ones that really draw the deer in during daylight hours. And we can set those things up so that they're real strategically fine-tuned so that they're productive.
Yeah, so you have 200 acres, and so I'm guessing, this is my assumption of what you're telling me here. I'm guessing those big ones are more of like your destination food sources, because maybe, do you have any ag around that, or is it more just big woods?
There's
and
no
that would be like
agriculture
a
for
huge...
at least 5 miles, so we have that's it. The only agriculture we have is food plots. So some of my neighbors have gotten into putting food plots in recent years, which is a great thing, because that spreads out that grazing pressure, so it doesn't like hammer those plots down so bad. But
right. So you have these big plots that are like destination plots. You don't hunt those strategically, and you have these smaller ones. Are you picking up like a flow from, like, let's say, bedding through the small plots to the big plot? Is that like, what's your strategy look like for the setup of those small plots, and how you guys hunt those?
Well, bedding areas on my property is really difficult because my property has got a lot of lowland areas that it's really thick, and my entire property is also treated as a sanctuary. A lot of people will designate certain areas as a sanctuary. You're going to hear like outdoor writer buzzwords, with as you said, the destination plots and the sanctuaries, but really your whole property should be a sanctuary. Probably 99% of my property is a sanctuary. The only place that's not is right around by my cabin, and maybe the trails that I walk in and out of to get to my stands. But those trails are still strategically located and well maintained. That it's really a sanctuary there as well too. And just the way I hunt the property as well. It's an all around strategy that a lot of people be overwhelmed when you look at the way that everything's laid out and how I go about doing things on that property. But it's very successful. Especially early in the season, as you mentioned, I've had a lot of success then. And there's a strategy that I use where I hunt very close to my cabin, for the first days of a hunt, where I'll put the pressure in those areas first so that it's close to the cabin. And then I just keep working my way out further away from those spots to get into areas that are unpressured as the hunt progresses. And then by the end of my hunt, I'll be on the back of the property in those spots. So I'm always hunting fresh spots. And I mix in public land hunts, in with those private property hunts to keep that pressure low. And that seems to be the key. You have to have that low pressure. If those deer figure out they're being hunted, they will not move during the daylight.
Yeah, it's over. It's over at that point. And I think a lot of guys mess up there is not realizing what human intrusion does, or thinking they can get away with stuff they can't, right?
Well, there's been a study done on that where biologists actually put radio collars on deer.
Yep.
And in a hunting area, area that is readily hunted, and then they recorded the times when the deer had contact with people, where they got spooked, and they figured out that it takes them at least a week before they return to that
Yeah.
area after they've been spooked. And if they
Yeah.
get spooked a second time, then it's a lot longer, or it may never happen again. They may avoid that spot for the rest of the season. So yeah,
Yeah, I think
pressure is really important.
that might be. There's an Auburn University study by Clint McCoy. Is that the one you're talking about?
You know, I did an article about it maybe 10 years ago. I don't remember who it was,
Okay.
but it was,
Yeah, I've referenced that one quite a few
yeah.
times, and it's one encounter, and the deer avoid those stand locations. Like they don't forgive people, right? So, yeah, keeping it super strategic and low pressure is key, and so you have kind of like this spider web approach from your cabin where you work out. Um, is that something? So you just start. So our season in Michigan starts October 1st, right? Is that when you start, or are you waiting for some other indicators to tell you like, hey, it's time, it's ready for me to hunt?
Well,
Hunt here.
I start on October 1st, and I hunt every decent day that I can get out. But I'm also a very avid bird hunter too. I have a bird dog, and I mix in that bird hunting a lot with my deer hunting. And that's not really a bad thing, because when you have as much time as I do, especially now that I'm retired, and I'm hunting every day for something, or unless it's just horrible weather, and it helps you to eliminate that or reduce that hunting pressure in your spots. And I run trail cameras, just like everybody else, and I run a lot of them. And I can't run cellular cams out where I'm at because there's no cell signal. I'm really out in the boonies, so I have to go check my cameras. So that when you put those cameras out, that has to be strategically done too, so you can check and get those cameras, so without spooking deer in the area. So it's all you have to think about every move you make when you're trying to be successful consistently.
Yeah, and I've talked to some older guys over the years. I do seminars and different things, and when I talk about this idea of surgical hunting, which I've written about and I have a seminar about, it makes sense to everybody. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But a lot of people just can't do it. Like especially if you have time on your hands, you're retired or whatever. Like, oh, I own this property. I want to hunt here as much as possible. And it's very hard to have self-control and realize that the more you hunt, the more you're hurting your chances, pretty much. And a lot of guys just can't do it. And so I'll tell them, I'm like, well, hunt somewhere else. Like, have some burn spots, public land or whatever, that you can still go out and enjoy, and maybe, get a good buck, but you're not burning out the same spot. You're not burning out your property. It's just very hard to do that self-control part there. See your dog there. It's hard to do for a lot of guys. But yeah, having something else, another spot to hunt, or even your bird hunting, something like that to break it up for you, is a very helpful thing to do. It helps more than people realize, I think. Okay, so here is your high IQ moment. When it comes to hunting challenging areas, whether it be the property that's a challenge or a whole region of the country, are you setting expectations based on the location you are actually in? It's easy to get wrapped up in what we see on social media or TV, but it's important to block this out and look at where you hunt. As we talked in the last episode, doing surveys of the top 10% of deer in your area can give you an honest baseline of potential and what you can expect, even if you push the harvest age a few years older. This is a good approach for being successful even in tough to hunt areas, and is something to really think about. And if you're tired of eating tag soup, tired of the neighbors shooting the bucks the year after year, and want to be at a new proficiency level where you can take the top deer where you hunt year after year, our Advanced Whitetail Workshop is for you. This 2-day intensive gives the exact tools, strategies, and mindsets needed to walk into any area with confidence and just get it done. It's the only program that is set up to evaluate you and tell you precisely what you need to do to see success. Sign up now while registration is still open, and tell a buddy to get the friend or family discount. I truly believe this workshop is the best investment you can make in yourself as a hunter. Check that out and register below. All right, and now let's get back to the podcast.
And that bird hunting that I do, that is my number one scouting technique for public land. I'm not scouting, while I'm bird hunting for like this year. I'm scouting for the next year, future years. And I'm out probably bird hunting, 40 to 50 days out of the year up in the UP. So I'm getting into areas that are extremely remote. That's one of my favorite places to bird hunt are going to be the very extremely remote areas, the same places I like to deer hunt. So I find these little honey holes, that because things change continuously in public land where you have to really keep tabs on things. Is one year you might have a lot of deer there. 5 years later, the winters will kill them off and there's few deer there. So you really have to do a lot of scouting. So that bird hunting helps me because I get into those wooded areas and really put on the miles.
Yeah, we'll get into some details of the public land here in
It all goes together.
segment 2. Yeah, no, it's a whole system of sorts, I'd say. But we'll dig into that a little bit more. But back to the trail cameras. So can you get in a little more detail with that? Like having this system you're very careful with trail cameras. What type of things do you do to make sure that isn't adding pressure? Because a lot of times that is the negative of trail cameras is I call it reverse surveillance. So you're actually allowing the deer to surveil you because of how you're placing them, how you're checking them, right? So how do you do that to keep pressure to a minimum?
I do it on an ATV, and I'm using trails. They're ATV trails, and I go right in with an ATV, and I get as close as I can with them. Leave the ATV running, and I go check them. And that seems to be the best way to do it. Most of these trail cameras I'm putting on ATV trails, like on crossings and ATV trails, or they're almost all on food plots. They're on entrances to food plots or trails leading to them, things like that. So that's the best way to do it. Hands down.
Yeah, we had a podcast earlier in season 1 with Doug Roberts where we talked about habituating deer to you and training deer, like because they don't associate vehicles and horses and things like that to danger. And so you're utilizing that, you're habituating them to just this normal thing like a farm tractor or something. It doesn't bother them, right? They don't associate with a human or being hunted. And then also you have I'm a big fan of this, you have the noise factor, right? So the noise of that, yeah, they hear it, but it's also disguising whatever you're doing, right?
They get used to it, I think, because there's ATVs running up and down the road, and neighbors all have them, and people are running around on them all during the season. They get all year long. They get used to them. And like Bill Winke does the same thing. I've seen it on his in his articles and his show that he's got on YouTube. He's going right on ATV, pulls right up to that camera. Sometimes he doesn't even get off his ATV and checks it.
Right. Yeah.
Most of them might have to actually walk a few feet, or a few yards. But some of the spots on my property there's no access with an ATV. Other than I've made trails for deer recovery, but getting into those spots, I'm going to just be digging ruts through muddy spots and whatever. So there are some spots I have to sneak into, and when you check those cameras, best to do it on a windy day when there's some noise, and you got some cover for you. Wind is your friend during deer season, actually.
Yep. Yeah, wind and rain, things like that to check, or even when I put up stands on public land. But really thinking through those strategies, and you can habituate deer to those movements, those sounds with ATVs and things like that. So do you have a story? This is one of the questions I threw out there. Do you have a unique story that shows strategy you use in this difficult to hunt area that kind of illustrates some of this stuff?
Well, I guess last year would be a good example of just what we were talking about earlier, where I didn't have any luck during the first 2 weeks of the season. So I typically go up there to my cabin for some bird hunting in September, and then I'll hunt the first week or two of the season. And then I come home for a while, take care of some business there, and go back up again. For the first 2 weeks of the season, I didn't get nothing last year. Didn't have any luck during that early part of the season. So, I went home, let things calm down on the property, came back, started using that same strategy where I was hunting those close to the cabin stands first. And right away I shot a deer. It was on the 18th or something like that, of October. and got a nice buck, and was able to get that deer out of there and hang it up. Well, 4 days later, I was hunting more further back into the property as I was working back, and exerting that pressure further back, and then I shot another buck, 4 days later.
And
So
you're
that
done.
worked perfect in that strategy, and I was done. And up in my area, it is legal to shoot does where I'm at. I'm right on the edge of where it's legal to shoot does, and I could kill 10 does there, but that would be every single one on the property, and probably maybe even beyond that. But we're limited to bucks only in realistic terms. None of the neighbors I have in my area have shot a doe in over 10 years because our deer numbers have gone so low. And people have realized that
Wow.
you just can't do it. There's too much predation there to allow not to allow it, but just to go and do it. So it's just voluntary. So
Yeah, that's a good
bucks
example
only.
of really knowing your own deer herd, because a lot of times on the state level, whoever's making the regulations might not know your exact herd where you're hunting. So really keeping tabs on that is important.
Absolutely. You have to talk to your neighbors and make sure they're on the same wavelength. I'm lucky that my neighbors are all pretty cool with that, and they understand, that we have tons of wolves now. If you go out there and kill does now, it's a tipping point, and you won't have any deer left.
Yeah, and
And
I
I
just
was up, I was
saw.
up at my property 2 weeks ago, and I checked my
Yeah.
cameras. Hadn't been up since an ice fishing trip back in the winter, and I had 31 wolves on my cameras pictures,
Wow.
and I had 18 bears and 8 bobcats, plus some coyotes and other animals I couldn't identify. That could have been coyotes or wolves, or probably more wolves than that. And while I was up there, I saw 6 wolves.
Wow.
Just I was building a blind out in the woods, and I had 6 wolves go by me.
Yeah, that's
That's what we're dealing with up there. So it
right.
makes it a lot different. But those wolves also have changed the way the deer behave as well too. They don't move nearly as much nocturnally as they used to. They move in the middle of the day. So
Really.
you have to make adjustments. You don't hunt as much early in the morning. You don't see deer at the end of the day. You'll see them more in the middle of the day because that's one time when the wolves aren't as active.
Uh,
Wolves start getting active during the middle of the day. If I see trail camera pics of them moving at noon, well, then they're going to be nocturnal then. The deer just
that's
kind of key in on when they're moving, and then that's when they'll come out themselves. The wolves are pretty notorious for coming out in the evening, so real late in the evening. So that's changed the way the deer even move, and you have to adapt to that.
yeah, that's interesting that the deer are quickly adapting to the wolves' habits, and we'll see if the wolves' habits adapt to the deer adaptation as well. There.
I saw that same thing when I hunted over in Wisconsin many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, when they had more wolves than we did at that time. And I was hunting with a friend of mine over there, and that's what we had to do. We had to start hunting right in the middle of the day because that's when them bucks were up and moving, and all deer were moving. And then it's just completely different
Hmm.
than what you would do normally, where you'd hunt the low light levels periods.
Yeah, so that's very different, very challenging, and people in Wisconsin, the UP of Michigan, Minnesota might have similar situations with
Oh, absolutely.
that particular predator there. So as we kind of wrap it up here, Mike, talking about challenging situations in hunting, if you were to give guys, let's say a top takeaway or two, or even yourself, here's an interesting question. When you were younger, what would you say to the 20-year-old self or guys out there, that hunt in similar challenging situations to where you hunt as like the top tips to be consistent and to have success?
You said in the little write up you gave me, I can't see to play the wind, huh? I have to mention that though because that is a key factor. But you can't just like hunt using the wind with without preparing to hunt for the wind. You have to have stands that are set up so that there are going to be certain areas where those deer move through, most likely where they're going to be, upwind of you, and you have to have a lot of stand setups. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I made when I was younger is I didn't have enough stands. Well, now I do. I have more stands. Like I forget where some of the stands are at. I have so many of them.
How many do you think you have? So you have 200 acres. How many do you think you have on that?
On my property, I have, well, I said, I got about 12 food plots. There's probably 25, 30 stands on my property. Maybe
Yeah.
more. It could be more.
Okay, so here are your high IQ takeaways and challenges. If where you hunt is challenging, I understand that, I really do. but try to start thinking about what success really means in your area and set proper realistic vision for your land. That's really important. And downloading our free land management starter kit is a great way to help you with that and to start on that path to true success. Find that link below. Okay, and next week we continue with our practical land and food strategies to make your land optimal to consistently take great whitetail. You won't want to miss my second talk with the legendary Mr. Tony LaPratte. That's always a wild time, and I will see you then.